My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 53 years old. 3 days ago, my son ripped the locket off my neck while I was sleeping. I woke up gasping, my hand flying to my chest, and it was gone. He stood in the doorway holding it, his knuckles white. "We're done waiting, Mom," he said. "We're opening it. Tonight." My daughter stood behind him, arms crossed, refusing to look at me. 70 years I kept my promise. 70 years I never once let curiosity win. And in one night, my own children decided my mother's dying wish meant nothing to them. What they found inside that locket didn't just break a promise. It broke our entire family. Before I tell you what actually happened, if you're new here, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below, where are you watching from? Let me take you back to when it all started. I was 7 years old the night my mother called me into her room. The lamp was dim. Her hands were shaking. "Come here, Eleanor," she whispered. I climbed onto the bed beside her. She pulled something from under her pillow, a small gold locket, cold against my palm. "This is yours now," she said. I turned it over. It wouldn't open. I pulled at the clasp anyway. Her hand shot out and gripped my wrist, harder than I expected. "No," she said. "Not now. Not ever, until you truly need to know." I didn't understand. I was 7. I asked her what was inside. She looked away from me, toward the window, like she was watching something only she could see. "Someone I loved," she said. "Someone I couldn't protect." Then she made me promise. Not a small promise. The kind sealed with a locked pinky, the kind you feel in your stomach. 3 weeks later, she was gone. I stood at her funeral with the locket already around my neck, 7 years old, guarding a secret I didn't even know I was carrying. After the funeral, I went to live with my aunt. She didn't ask about the locket. Nobody did, at first. Then came the foster homes. 3 of them by the time I was 12. Different houses, different rules, same cold gold weight against my chest every night. Kids at school noticed it. One girl grabbed the chain during recess, yanking hard. "What's inside?" she demanded. I pulled back so fast I fell. Knees scraped, chain still intact. I never told a teacher. I never told anyone why it mattered so much. At my second foster home, a woman named Carol tried prying it with a bobby pin while I slept. I woke up mid-attempt, grabbed it from her hands, and didn't speak to her for a week. She apologized eventually. Said she was just curious. I told her curiosity wasn't worth breaking promises. I was 10 years old saying that sentence, and I meant every word of it. By 13, I stopped explaining the locket altogether. If people asked, I just said it was my mother's. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. I didn't know the whole truth myself yet. At 16, everything came apart at once. My foster father at the time, Richard, found out I'd missed curfew and exploded. Screaming. Slamming his fist on the kitchen counter. I screamed back, every year of anger I'd buried finally surfacing. He grabbed my shoulders. I shoved him off. Then my hand went to my neck, gripping the locket so hard the edges cut into my palm. "What is so special about that thing?" he yelled. "Your mother's dead, Eleanor. She's not watching you." Something snapped in me. I ripped the chain off, raised it over the tile floor, ready to smash it against the counter. Ready to finally know. Ready to be done carrying a secret that wasn't even mine to keep. My arm froze mid-swing. I don't know what stopped me. Maybe her voice in my head. Maybe just fear. I stood there shaking, locket raised, tears streaming, and slowly lowered my arm. Richard walked out of the kitchen without another word. I sat on the floor for an hour, chain back around my neck, hands still trembling. That was the closest I ever came to breaking my promise. It wouldn't be the last time I was tempted. But it was the first time I understood how much willpower it would take to keep this promise for a lifetime. I met Daniel when I was 22. Coffee shop, rainy Tuesday, He spilled his drink reaching for a napkin and apologized 3 times. 6 months later, he asked about the locket over dinner. I told him the whole story, my mother, the promise, the pinky swear I made at 7. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Then we never open it, he said. Simple as that. I married him a year later. I never told the story again, not to friends, not to family, not even when people asked directly. Daniel became the only person who understood without needing more explanation. Some nights, early in our marriage, I'd catch him staring at the locket while I slept. Not reaching for it. Just looking. Once he admitted it. I wonder about her sometimes, he said. Whoever she was. I told him I wondered too. That was the truth. 22 years old and I still had no idea who I was protecting, or why. I just knew I'd promised. And somehow, that was enough to build an entire marriage around. 2003, I was 37. Daniel and I were on a highway outside Denver when a truck lost control in the rain and hit us head-on. I remember glass. I remember screaming. I remember the paramedic cutting my seatbelt while blood ran down my face. In the ambulance, my fingers found the locket before they found anything else, before my own pain, before Daniel's hand. A young paramedic leaned over me, checking my vitals. "Ma'am, is there someone we should call?" I couldn't speak. I just gripped the locket tighter. Lying on that stretcher, certain I might not survive the night, one thought cut through the fear louder than anything else. If I die not knowing, this promise dies with me. My thumb found the clasp. For one full second, I almost opened it right there, blood-soaked and terrified, surrounded by strangers. Then Daniel's hand found mine. Squeezed once. I let go of the clasp. Survived surgery. Woke up 2 days later, locket still sealed, still around my neck. Daniel was in the chair beside my bed, watching me the way he had all those years ago at dinner. Neither of us said a word about how close I'd come to breaking it. My children arrived years apart, Michael first, then Grace 4 years later. Both of them grew up watching that locket the way other kids watch a locked drawer in a parent's desk. Michael asked first, maybe 6 years old, tugging at the chain during a hug. "What's inside, Mommy?" I gave him the simple version. A promise to my mother. He accepted it the way children accept most things, without much question. Grace was different. By the time she was 9, she'd started asking harder questions. "But you don't even know what's inside. Doesn't that bother you?" I told her it didn't. That was a lie, and some part of her seemed to know it. Every few years, one of them would try again, older each time, more persistent. Family dinners. Birthdays. Once, Michael offered to open it, just to put me out of my misery, half joking, half serious. I shut it down fast, same as always, firm, but gentle. What I didn't know was that Grace had stopped asking me directly. She'd started asking other people instead. Digging through old boxes. Making phone calls I knew nothing about. By the time she turned 30, my daughter was chasing an answer I hadn't even let myself look for. Grace never told me what she found. Not that year, not for a long time after. She'd started at the county records office, pulling my mother's birth certificate for what she called family tree research. That was the story she gave me. It wasn't the real reason. What she found instead was a second document, a name I didn't recognize, listed as my mother's sister. A sister no one in our family had ever mentioned. Not once, in 30 years of holidays and stories and photo albums. Grace sat in her car outside the records office for 20 minutes before she could drive home, she told me much later. She called the county office in the next town, asking about adoption records from the same year. The clerk asked her to hold. When she picked up again, her voice had changed. "I think you should come in person," the clerk said. Grace didn't tell her husband. Didn't tell her brother. Didn't tell me. She drove home that night, walked past me in the kitchen, and said everything was fine. I believed her completely. I had no idea my own daughter was sitting on something that would eventually unravel everything I thought I knew about my mother, and about myself. By 45 my memory had started slipping in small ways, misplaced keys, forgotten names, moments that blurred at the edges. Grace visited every Sunday by then, always watching me a little too closely, though I didn't understand why yet. One evening in 2020, running a fever from a bad flu, I drifted somewhere between sleep and waking. Grace was beside my bed. I remember gripping her hand and saying words that weren't fully mine. "Tell her I'm sorry," I whispered. "Tell her I didn't know either." Grace went very still. "Know what, Mom? Who are you talking about?" I didn't answer. My eyes had already closed again. In the morning, I remembered none of it. But Grace did. She told me later she sat in that chair until sunrise, replaying my words over and over, holding a secret of her own she still hadn't shared with me. Two secrets in one house now, both circling the same locket, both circling the same unanswered question, and neither of us saying a word about it to the other. I recovered from the flu within a week. Grace never fully recovered from what she'd heard me say. 6 months later, Grace called a family meeting, no explanation, just asked everyone to come to my house on a Sunday. Michael flew in from Chicago. His wife came too. Daniel had passed 3 years earlier, so it was just the four of us at my kitchen table, the same table where Daniel once told me we'd never open it. Grace placed a folder in front of her. Her hands were shaking. "Mom," she said. "I need to tell you something I found 6 years ago." I felt my chest tighten before she said another word. She told me about the records office. The unnamed sister. The adoption files from the next county over. Michael's face went pale beside her. "Why didn't you tell any of us?" he asked. "Because I didn't know how," Grace said, "and because I was scared of what it meant about Grandma." The room went silent. I sat there, 73 years old, staring at my own daughter, realizing she'd been carrying a secret about my mother for 6 years while I sat across from her every Sunday, completely unaware. "There's more," Grace said quietly. She looked directly at the locket around my neck. "Mom, I think it's time." I gripped the locket instinctively, the way I had my entire life. "No," I said. I promised her. Michael leaned forward. "Mom, whatever this is, it's bigger than a promise you made when you were 7 years old." Grace slid the folder toward me. Photographs. Names I didn't recognize. A woman who shared my mother's eyes but wasn't her. "I think this is her sister," Grace said. "I think this is who's inside your locket." I stared at the folder for a long time, my hands still pressed flat against the gold at my chest. 70 years of loyalty. 70 years of silence, sitting right there on the table in the shape of a stranger's photograph. "If I open this," I said slowly, "there's no going back to not knowing." Grace nodded. Michael reached across the table and took my other hand, the same way Daniel used to. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said. I sat there another full minute, feeling the weight of every year I'd spent protecting a secret I never chose. Then, for the first time in 66 years, my fingers found the clasp with real intention. Not fear. Not temptation. Just readiness. "All right," I whispered. "Let's find out who she was." My hands shook as I worked the tiny clasp, the same one my mother's fingers had sealed shut before I could even read. It resisted at first, stiff from decades untouched. Then, with a soft click, it opened. Grace gasped beside me. Inside wasn't my mother's face. It was a young woman, maybe 20, dark curls, a small scar above her left eyebrow, smiling at whoever held the camera. A stranger. Completely unfamiliar, and yet something about her jaw, her eyes, felt quietly, unsettlingly familiar. Behind the photograph, folded so small it had gone unnoticed for decades, was a piece of paper. Michael carefully unfolded it. His hand stilled. "Mom," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You need to read this yourself." I took it from him. Handwriting I didn't recognize, faded but legible. A name. A date. 3 sentences that rearranged everything I thought I understood about where I came from, and who my mother really was to the woman in that photograph. I read it twice before I could speak. "This isn't possible," I finally said. Grace took my hand. Mom, what does it say? The note was written by the woman in the photograph. Her name was Margaret. Underneath it, one line explained everything. To whoever raises my daughter, tell her I loved her before I ever let her go. My mother wasn't my birth mother. She was my aunt. Margaret was 17 when I was born, unmarried, and in 1953 that was enough to destroy a family's reputation. My grandparents forced the adoption. My mother, Margaret's older sister, took me in and raised me as her own, on one condition Margaret herself demanded, that I never be told, not until I was old enough to understand what it cost both women to make that choice. The locket wasn't a mystery my mother left behind. It was a promise Margaret extracted from her, sealed the same year I was born, meant to be opened only when the truth could no longer hurt anyone still living to feel its weight. Margaret died 4 years after giving me up, never seeing me grow older than a photograph. My mother carried that guilt in silence for the rest of her life, right up until the night she pressed that locket into my hands and made me promise the same thing Margaret once made her promise. 70 years later, I finally understood. I wasn't protecting a stranger's secret. I was protecting my mother's love, both of them.